Have you ever heard of autism? Do you know anything about it? Do you know someone with autism? Well, last time I checked, it was roughly 1 in 68 people who are primarily male, not all male, but mostly male, are diagnosed with autism. And I have autism, and I just felt like I wanted to make this video to help spread some awareness and some understanding about it. So stick to the end of the video, maybe you'll be able to help understand people around you better, someone in the community better, or just more shed some light on something that is not so easily understood by people who don't have autism. And there's a specific reason for that. And the reason for that is, well, autism is a neurological difference. It means that we biologically have a different brain. And by that I mean in terms of actual brain mass and in terms of mass of areas in the brain, but also with respect to how these areas in the brain are actually connected. So not only is my brain biologically different, it's wired differently as well, which means that I process the world differently. I process the world differently in terms of speed, intensity, what I notice, and how that affects me. And there's a lot of pros and cons to that. But if I were to break it down, in the simplest terms, it would be sensory, the level of, in the world, there's information, right? There's data. And this is going to be really hard for me to explain because it's actually quite a complex topic. And I am by no means an expert. However, I have lived with it for nearly 3 decades. So I know a little bit about it. But essentially, autism is taking in too much information from the world. And this is quite actually very similar to ADHD. And my own personal hypothesis is that ADHD and autism are the exact same mechanism, but flipped. Two sides of the same coin, at least with respect to hypersensitivity. So hypersensitivity is that there's so much information in the world, and most people's brains are inhibitory. Now, what do I mean by inhibitory? By inhibitory, I mean it blocks out most information. My brain does not do this. My brain does not do this. So I get way too much information in my brain, and it can be like overloading. You know when you've had too much coffee, or you've gone into a situation where you just feel like there's just so much going on, you can't make any sense of it, and you just get overwhelmed and you get anxious? That's pretty much the autistic experience 24/7, all the time. So my hypothesis is not so much that we can't pick up on social cues. I think it's actually that because you know when you don't understand something and your brain will just think of all the different things of what it could be, and it usually gravitates towards the worst case scenario. And there's a reason for that, and it's because gravitating towards the worst case statistically increases the likelihood that we will survive, right? So social cues, there's so many different potentialities. It's like it could be this, it could be X, Y, Z, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, whatever, right? But with physics, it's like if this happens, then this, or 1 + 1 always equals 2. So there's a certainty in that, and in that certainty, there's a reduction in the anxiety. There's a calmness. So just imagine this, right? Picture this. Imagine you're cruising through the world, and there's nothing makes any sense at all whatsoever. Especially the social environment. You're probably going to feel a little bit anxious, no? Yes. So would it not make sense that you'd want to feel less anxious? Well, most people don't really want to feel anxious. You get sick freaks like me who kind of enjoy it because I've just been anxious for my whole life. So I've just kind of learned to enjoy it at some point. It's a kind of a bit of a, what do they call it? A masochism? Anyway, so in certainty, there's a calmness, there's a peace, there's a tranquility, there's a reduction in anxiety. So, but with social cues, it's pretty much open to interpretation, whereas 1 + 1 always equals 2. So imagine you go into a social situation and things don't make sense because there's about 4 billion different things it could be. That's overwhelming. For me personally, it's completely overwhelming in every regard, and I'm just speaking for myself here, and this is not an autistic thing. What I'm about to say is not just an autistic thing. It's not just specific to autism. This is a me thing. Well, I'm quite intelligent and IQ is essentially brain processing power. So an engine that can go a lot faster, you know, there's dangers that come along with going very, very, very fast. And in that danger is like when you pair this proclivity to intake more information in the world than other people, and then you pair this with the cognitive engine, the IQ which means that I can think incredibly fast, and then pair that with out of the box thinking, and then all of a sudden I can just think of the most craziest potentialities, which is why I'm very innovative. But in the same sense, because I'm very innovative, I can think of very, very negative potentialities as well. So that can even just amplify my anxiety out of just, it gets a lot, right? So how does someone with autism manage this? Well, at least for me personally, I am quite extroverted, but socializing makes me very anxious. So I actually like to spend a lot of time by myself. So another way of just reducing anxiety, well, fundamentally, autism is about, I feel, at least for me, and speaking for a lot of people that I know with autism's, in my experience, just about anxiety management and reduction in anxiety. Not so much, you're reducing anxiety by, one, removing stimulation, but also increasing certainty. So I was reading some of the psychological literature on autism, and people with autism have a high explanatory drive. Well, what's an explanatory drive? Explanatory drive is when, or just asking questions like why. It's like, someone will say, this happens. I go, why? Because not knowing is, like, it's not that it scares me, but it just gives me a lot of anxiety. And the more I understand things, the more my anxiety can be reduced. And then, in my perspective, in my experience, my hypothesis about what confidence is, in my experience, is just the absence of anxiety. If you think about it, you have like toddlers and children who are very confident. They'll say something completely stupid and they're just very confident because they're just not anxious. But as they get older and as they hit their teenage years and they become more self-conscious, the anxiety increases because this level of self-consciousness increases. You know, it's like when children develop the ability for abstract thought and abstract conception, it increases their ability to understand where they might be wrong, etc. And just general cognitive ability increases. And with cognitive increases comes increases in negative emotion because we can think ourselves into bigger, darker pits, which is why a lot of people that are very smart have a lot of mental health problems, because if you're very smart, you can think of lots of positive things that are very helpful for everyone, but you can also equal and opposite think of a lot of negative things that are very harmful to your own psychological well-being and all the well-being of society and people around you. So for me, autism is about anxiety management, and I utilize my explanatory drive, which really, in my estimation, the explanatory drive is actually a strategy to reduce anxiety by increasing certainty. So it's like, if I know 1 + 1 = 2, whenever I encounter that in the world, I know 1 + 1 = 2, but what if I encounter some vague facial expression that I not only cannot quantify, you know, in order to understand something, first you have to be able to diagnose what it is. So if you can't even diagnose what it is, how the hell can you research it to increase certainty? And a lot of these things are not thinking activities. They are empathizing activities, whereby you're using your theory of mind, which is something that people with autism have a deficit of. And theory of mind being understanding, through the understanding of oneself, you understand the other. But the whole aspect of theory of mind requires things that are not quantitative. They are qualitative, they are subjective, they are not clear, they are not mathematical. And mathematics provides a certainty, physics provides a certainty, computation provides a certainty, whereas empathizing, mentalizing, theory of mind, thinking, this person might be thinking this, for me, that's anxiety central. That's anxiety central. So, yeah, things whereby you are not able to easily derive certainty about what is actually happening, it just exponentially magnifies my anxiety to the point where it's so unbelievably out of control. Like, I don't think people who don't have autism can actually probably ever understand this. It's so much. It's so much. Yeah, I know that I'm not the best speaker, and that's because oftentimes when I'm speaking, I'm thinking. Because if I sit down and trying to like write these things, well, I have ADHD as well, so I get very distracted because once again, I get overstimulated and I have too many thoughts in my brain. And like again, it's hard for people who are neurotypical, which is to say that don't have some kind of neurodivergence, be it ADHD, autism, or whatever, to really understand all of their thoughts are particularly linear. There's like this and this and this. And when I'm medicated, my thoughts are linear. But I lose my personality. I can't eat as much because I don't get as hungry. It affects my sleep. It just does a whole lot of bad things to me. But yeah, I hope this provided some kind of insight into the autistic mind, the neurodivergent mind, if you will. And hopefully you could use this information as a tool to help better understand the world, perhaps yourself if you're a neurodivergent, and your family member, me, whoever. Peace.